Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Thanks for being with me. We talk a lot about alt protein burgers. Okay, we got that down. We've been talking about chicken and alt seafood as the newcomers to the scene. But what about alt materials? Ultimately, a lot of animal products are then used in leather and fabrics, etc., even silk products, of course, coming from silkworms. What's going to happen to this market? Is it shifting like the food industry is shifting? What does that mean? What kind of innovations are taking place? What will be the valuation of this marketplace? Is it as exciting as alt proteins? Let's find out. I want to bring on my guest today, Macy Marriott. Thanks for being with me. She's the director of the GlassWall Syndicate, and Elaine Siu. I hope I'm saying that right. Oh, thank God. She is the Chief Innovations Officer of Material Innovation Initiative. Thank you both for being with me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let's dive into it because together, I think we have breaking news. Actually, you are talking about this for the first time. Together, your organizations are working to do something really novel in the space, kind of I want to say a precursor to the blow up of the marketplace that is to be alt materials. Macy, why don't I start with you? What is GlassWall Syndicate? Then we'll hear about what is Material Innovations Initiative and why you two are working together.
Yeah, happy to. Well, thank you so much for having me on. GlassWall Syndicate, we are the largest investor network in the plant and cell-based space. So we have over 200 investors. We started this in 2017. So we've been there in the alt protein space when it looked very different than it does today. We started with a handful of investors, a handful of startups in the space. And next thing we knew, we had 50 investors, and 100 investors, 150 investors. We passed 200 investors. Obviously, everyone knows the amount of startups in the space just continues to boom. And so what we do is we connect our investors to game-changing startups, usually early stage, pre-seed, seed, some Series A. A lot of that focus has been on alt protein, but we also welcome in alternative to animal testing technologies like organ on a chip and next generation materials, which is why we partnered with MII. I know we'll dive into that. So I'll let Elaine share a little bit more about MII and the wonderful work that they're doing.
Great.
Thank you so much, Macy. So MII, Material Innovation Initiative, quite a mouthful. We're a very young organization. We're a nonprofit. We see ourselves as an industry builder, an industry that doesn't even have a name yet. We're calling it Next Gen Material Industry, and we actually published the first State of the Industry report a few months ago. So we're basically kind of scoping this space. This is what alternative protein is to food, and next gen materials will affect the fashion industry, the home goods industry, and the automobile industry. So it's very, very exciting. And I also worked in alternative proteins before coming into this role. So it's very exciting. It's like moving from one, it was a really nascent industry. I also started there before plant-based was a term that people use. And now kind of like starting all over again, but seeing all the parallels and similarities and doing it all over again. And with the previous experience, having that confidence that this will happen. If alternative proteins happen, this is probably going to happen the same way. So it's a very exciting time to be doing this work.
Yeah, I love your answer that if alternative proteins happen, then this is probably going to happen as well. I want to come back to that statement because it's such a profound one, I think. But before we do that, tell us, I'll start with Elaine, why you are working with GlassWall Syndicate. What synergies are there that you both want to build off of?
So as mentioned, we're trying to build an industry, and investment is a big part of it. So the way that MII is doing this work is basically we're separated into kind of three pillars. The first thing that has to happen is kind of the innovation. That's why we're calling it Material Innovation Initiative. It all starts with the scientific, technological breakthrough that we can bring better products into the market that can be the alternative, that can be the next gen, that replace what doesn't work anymore, right? So that has to come first. So that is our sci-tech department would do that. And then you will need to bring these kind of novel technology, turn them into companies. commercialize, scale up, commercialize, and bring things to market. So that's like the second step, which is kind of where I come in, where my clients are mainly the startups and the investors. And that's kind of synergy that we will have with GlassWall Syndicate. And finally, the final step is that once we have, help these companies grow, they then can scale up, commercialize, then it's working with brands and just like big buyers that will adopt and use these materials and bring them to market and to make it mainstream. So that's kind of the path that we see how to build out this industry.
Yeah, it's such fundamental work, foundational work, I'll say. I think of Material Innovation Initiative as the GFI of materials. The GFI, Good Food Institute, also being a think tank, a provider of research, a provider of resources, a provider of guidance, a provider even of investment dollars, which brings us back to GlassWall Syndicate.
That's where I came from.
Oh, that's where you came from. Oh, gosh. Well, there you go. You see the synergy. So, Macy, I'm curious, what came first, the hot air or the balloon? Is it the investors of GlassWall Syndicate who are saying, hey, I want more than food? Or is it GlassWall Syndicates that's saying, hey, we need a bigger pipeline of small companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So GlassWall Syndicate, what's really unique about our structure is we're a nonprofit. So we're a 501c6 and we're on a mission to get more capital deployed in the space. And our members are both individually accredited, so angels, as well as firms, family offices, trust foundations, and we're a combination of different investors. And so because we're not a fund, we don't have the same limits. We can be geographically agnostic. We can bring in lots of different companies from different categories. We can, focus on companies at different stages. We can bring in pre-revenue companies because the same parameters don't exist for us. And with 200 investors, even if there's, members who don't invest outside the US or they do, that we have some that do invest in cell ag and some that don't. But ultimately, if only 10% of the investor network is interested in a specific category or something like that, that's still 20 members on a deal team. That's still 20 investors that are exploring a company. And as we know, 20 investors, that can oversubscribe around really quickly. So I remember reading the Material Innovation Initiative's recent report, and it talked about the 3 I's. It was the innovators, which are the startups, it was the investors, and then it was the industry brands. And MII, they know the innovators, they know the industry brands, they have those relationships. What GlassWall has is investors. And yes, they're very much hungry for seeing companies come through that are in the next gen materials industry, because a lot of our members have been part of this for years. And they remember what GlassWall looked like when we had 17, members, and we were having all of our pitch days like in person because there weren't that many of us. And, they remember those days, and they've seen that progress firsthand. They've seen it boom. Now it's like rounds in plant-based are getting like so competitive, and, things are just changing really quickly, which is great. But they are seeing those trends that we were just talking about at the beginning of this, where they're going, I've seen this before. And I think I've got an opportunity to explore these while they're really early stage. And really, when you support them that early stage, obviously there's some return potential there, but there's also a huge impact potential. So it's just mirroring what our investors are looking for.
Okay, so I love this. You're saying that investors are thinking next step. They want to see like where things are going, even more future than the future of food is. They're thinking the future of material. So really early investors. But I'm wondering, Elaine, when we say that alt materials tracks alt protein, is it because of the supply issues? So a lot of animal products end up after food, anything that's left over sometimes, such as skin, can end up as a material. So is the materials industry getting the memo like the food industry is, that they better start innovating for a different kind of future because their supply chain is going away? Is any of that impacting this?
Well, that's a big question. But I think the two main, it is from the consumers, as well as, yes, maybe some impact on the supply chain as well. But I think it is really seeing that this is what consumers are asking. And it doesn't take a genius to kind of make that leap, right? When everyone is kind of looking at a plant-based burger, and then like that shift into thinking, what about leather? The whys are all the same. The whys of why we need to switch to plant-based burger, they're all the same. It's the same animals being raised the same way. The products that come out of that might go into different streams, into different industries, as you said. But all the reasons why the environmental impact, animal welfare impacts, all those things happen in, the same way. So I think it is the realization of, something has to change. And if something has to change in one industry, what about that other industry that is also being supplied all these raw materials from the animal agriculture industry? So I think it's just a logical kind of development that it will spread into other industries.
I love that you say this, that it's consumer driven, and that consumers, at least from your vantage point, are moving beyond food and saying, oh no, this is actually a lifestyle choice for me. Because once you make the leap from the burger to, I really don't want animal leather in my car. I don't want to sit there with animal leather all day or on my couch or feathers in my couch, etc. You start to realize it's a holistic way of living, or let's say even of seeing the world. And so I'm back to Macy at GlassWall Syndicate about the kind of impact you can have when you, through investing and through innovation, and so we as people who believe in the free market, who like to see capitalism take its toll, this is very exciting, right? To see what kind of impact we can make for world standards through our spending. It's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's one of those things where, if you went to an alt protein conference anytime in the last 5 years, I guarantee one of the panels said kind of those buzzwords, right? Price, taste, convenience. You hear price, taste, convenience all the time.
Bruce Feedback, he's just like there saying it on repeat.
Price, taste, convenience, But I think that's similar to what Elaine is saying here. Like, we're seeing that same kind of trend from consumers, again, kind of referencing this report that MII put together. But I remember reading about, those consumers that were still, preferencing or preferred animal-based leather over alternative leathers. And it really talked about how there was an association of animal-based leather being higher quality, the performance was better, all of those things. But these companies, they're working on great products, great performance. They're working on scaling. They're working on price point. So at the end of the day, we expect consumers, especially the younger generation, we've got millennials and Gen Z, that they care about these things. They care about sustainability. They care about animal welfare. So if we can compete on those things, then we're that much closer. And so if investors can fund those early rounds to be able to give them the capital that they need for the R&D to get there, I think it's really exciting for us.
Yeah, I would agree that 5 years ago, people thought, oh, well, animal leather is going to be better. It's going to be the higher end. It's going to have more luxury. It's going to be more durable. And I see that really shifting, that people are saying, I just don't want to be associated with the things that are polluting the planet and maybe not aligning with my lifestyle. So I see that shift. But for that shift to really take place, price, taste, convenience, as you say, it's got to be, quality materials. Elaine, what kind of innovation technology? I know none of us, all three of us, none of us are the scientists here in the room, but what kind of cutting edge innovation are we seeing?
Where do I start?
I
think that is the exciting thing, and that is why this industry is forming. It's really forming because there are better products possible because of technological breakthrough. Same thing as we wouldn't have an alternative protein industry if we never move past tofu and the kind of 1.0 kind of veggie burger, right? So it always starts with that. And I completely agree with what both of you said, is that the demand is the foundation. And now to take things to the next level, we need to work on the supply. Because there is only so much, yes, people care more, and then we need to do, like, things are happening in the environment, governments are taking notice, etc. Those are the foundations. But this is this in the real world, you can only ask consumers to make not that much sacrifice.
No.
Yes, they care. That already created the demand. It is up to us to then create reasonable supply, competitive supply to actually meet that demand, which means, so an example of kind of the technology that we're seeing now, again, parallel to alternative protein, right? That is reinventing how we grow, how we create protein. Here is kind of the same thing. It can be protein, polymer. It's the smallest unit of what actually makes. So we're doing these reports that's called like what makes fur, what makes leather, what makes wool. To actually understand the building block of what are these things, right? At the end of the day, meat is the protein, you have the fat and all that. So finding out those components. So when we talk about next gen materials, it can be very different, like leather, very different from wool, right? The composition of what they are, hair versus skin, etc. But again, the innovation happens in that building block. So we have fermentation, for instance, all these different kind of technologies. Also going back to nature, like mycelium is taking kind of inspiration from nature. Oh, these things are naturally forming that has the texture of leather. How can we, further improve that and basically utilize those natural properties and develop that into next gen leather? So there's a whole spectrum of technology, nature, all playing together to create materials.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I think of the cutting edge company run by Eben Bayer, Ecovative Design, and his partner. The two of them are also the founders of At Last. So they've got At Last bacon and other things made out of mycelium to eat, whereas Ecovative is packaging and design out of mycelium, which can be indeed quite strong. Mm-hmm. And it's grown in these large flats that other fermented proteins can also be grown in these large trays, and then they're shaped and formed and can be quite strong. The magic of mushrooms, basically. I digress, but let me kind of go back to what you're saying. Let's just take one of them. Now, again, none of us are scientists, but I think this is interesting. What defines leather? And I ask this for two reasons. So that we can really understand what it is perhaps we may or may not be missing, and will there be any legal ramifications down the line? So let me explain. What is leather? Is it defined as skin? And will this mean that it'll end up having legal issues like the alt protein does with its naming? Is sausage? What defines sausage? So is leather skin, or are you guys looking at it at a much more sub level than that of what makes up skin? I'm just curious if you know it.
Yeah, so I think there are two levels to this question. How I can answer this. One is the legal definition, right? Which is leather is leather. The legal definition, as of now, it has to come from an animal.
Okay.
And you can define it however you want to, basically, right? Like, so that's one thing. The second thing is, what do consumers need or want from it, and including the buyers as well. So that is about the quality, the performance, the aesthetic. Like, what do you need the leather to do for you, the material to do for you?
Functionality.
I need it to be a pair of shoes that's not going to break down in a year. I need it to look like a luxurious bag that I will pass on to my daughter. What do you need it to do? So I think the difference between food and materials is that you don't need to eat it. No one is going to eat a bag. And I think that creates so much more space to actually define what is or is not leather. Mm-hmm. Because we won't be like looking at nutritional value. So as you said, you summed it up very perfectly, functionality, right?
Yeah. And I also, sorry.
Yeah, please go on.
Oh, I was just gonna add to that and say that, it in parallel to alt protein, like something that I think, Impossible Foods and Beyond Burger did so well. It's like, you could ask that same question about a burger, right? What's a burger? And I know that there's all these kind of similar to what Elaine said. You could take it from a very strong like legal perspective and naming and all of that. But ultimately to a consumer, which is what matters and what's driving, the demand. A burger is something that hits your senses, right? It looks good. It tastes good. It smells good. It pops on the, pan while you're cooking it. It sounds good. It's hitting on those senses. So for us, how we think about that, obviously, we're more from the investor lens, but we kind of draw those parallels to people who are asking that question to us all the time. What is a burger? What is a chicken nugget? What is crab cake? Like, what are all of those things? And for us, it's about, okay, if it hits on the consumer's senses, then that's what matters. So to Elaine's point, I completely agree. It's about durability. It's about smell. It's about performance. It's about quality. It's about aesthetic. It's about all of those things.
And this might be too specific, Macy, but what are investors getting most excited about? Is it replacements in car leather? This is what I see from, sort of outside of the bubble, if you will. I see fashion really getting into this big and fast with more and more chain stores, high-end chain stores around the globe getting rid of fur. And I would say, maybe I'm just guessing here, 80% have done that already. I'm seeing lots of high-end vegan shoes. So really this taste, price, convenience, this quality level of replacement for leather happening. I'm seeing it in car seats. So before I go to Elaine, Macy, what are investors getting most excited about?
I think one really important distinction, although of course there's excitement around, brands, when we think about the next gen materials companies that are really exciting, or the innovation that's really exciting to our investors, it's less at the brand level, like having, a shoe line or a coat line or something like that. And it's more at the material innovation level itself. Investors are getting really excited about the impact, how large a company like that could get if they are creating, whether that's plant-based, whether that's cell-based, whether it's some sort of hybrid, maybe it's some other sort of, biotechnology that they're applying. We're really excited about those next gen materials that can be used and touch fashion, automotive, et cetera. It's touching all of those. But of course, we still have love for the brands out there. We've had House of Fluff came through GlassWall Syndicate and successfully fundraised just really realistic looking fur coats. Obviously, big believer, as is everyone else in the syndicate, like fur is just, it just breaks our hearts. And to see something that was so realistic, so mission driven, really great quality. Her customers love her products. Like, we were really excited to have her come through the syndicate as well. So I just want to drive that distinction. We do love brands, but really what investors are getting most excited about are the material innovation.
So the technology and the B2B, the B2B space, which is so interesting when investors really go down that, because a brand gives you, it's sort of like, oh gosh, the no-brainer, the low-hanging fruit. It gives you something to hang on to. You say like, oh, I get the brand. It makes me feel good. I'll invest in that. What when you're investing in the technology, really investing in the shift that you want to see take place, which is so exciting. And it's interesting to hear you say that when we go to next gen, it's next gen materials, it'll be not just plant-based, but just like following in food, as we discussed, it'll be fermented proteins or fermented structures, maybe I should say, or cell-based new materials. And so I think that's really exciting. We did say that it's really consumer driven, but Elaine, I want to ask you, are you seeing fashion houses say, hey, my customers want this, give it to me? Is that where you're seeing the most demand, is from the particular businesses themselves saying, I need alt materials?
So I think in this supply chain, we're seeing, as Macy said, that is why like the investment is primarily for the tech to whether it's scale up, breakthrough, etc. So it's the material innovation. The fashion houses in this case is more or less the buyers. Mm-hmm. They are the buyers before the end consumer. And that's how we kind of see it fit into this whole chain. So driven by the end consumer's demand and also just all these sustainability goals that these fashion houses have as well. They need to find new materials in order to meet those goals. So we've talked to, I think, about 40 of the biggest brands. 38 of them said that, yes, they are looking for these materials. They want to switch into these materials. At this point, it is more like we need more of these materials. We need them to grow faster, scale up faster, commercialize, be available. in bigger volumes, and we need them to just move faster because the demand is definitely there. And I'm talking about demand from the buyers, which is the fashion houses, the automobile industry. So we're trying to just have it meet the demand that's already there to produce those products that meet the qualities and performance.
And Macy, what's keeping back the scale? Is it the amount of investors in the space? How much money's going into the space? I mean, we can barely get government research for alt protein. So I know there's not a lot of, I'm assuming there's not a lot of government research dollars being spent into alt materials. Do I have that right?
Well, I think that that's a big part of how we decided to form this committee. So just because I don't know that we ever officially said like what this partnership is. So GlassWall Syndicate and MII, we're partnering to create a first of its kind committee. So it is co-chaired by Elaine and then Naomi Sachs, who is a GlassWall Syndicate member. And we have a dozen GlassWall Syndicate members that are sitting on the committee. And GlassWall has 4 committees. So kind of just to give an example, we also have an alternative to animal testing committee. We call it the New Approach Methodologies Committee. That's run by Heather Courtney and Robert Dupree. And they somewhat recently partnered with the Center for Contemporary Sciences because they have a lot more connection to innovative companies in that space. And so they're kind of driving those companies our way for funding. And those partnerships and committees are really important because it's a way for us as an organization to have members and partners come together, meeting of the minds, and say, what can we do to kind of drive some really great impact and deliverables and initiatives and just bring all these partners together. And so, of course, that was part of it, is that, you know, this committee, and I can let Elaine speak to it more because she's co-chairing it with Naomi, but that's a huge part of why we came together. We want to bring more investment into these companies. Our investors want to see more companies in next-gen industry. It just makes sense. But I'll let Elaine share, of course, more about what the committee is going to look like.
Yeah, this is very, very new. And but I think it is very promising because, again, we've seen it in alternative protein. And these people have done it in alternative protein. At this point, when the industry is so nascent, we need these first movers. A lot of the times, these startups don't just need people who are willing to write a check. They need strategic investors. They need investors that get their values, get their vision, but also can bring more than money to the table, introduce them to a distributor network, help them scale up, have the experience, maybe entrepreneurial experience themselves, maybe whether it's a family office or, you know, a VC firm that has that connection that can really escalate the whole scale up and commercialization process for them.
Yeah, it's very exciting. You really, you know, they call them angels for a reason, you know, and of course, family offices as well. But these individuals who get the vision early and really support the technology so that at some point it can scale. For scaling, we didn't really talk about that. What are some of the hurdles that you see there? We've already talked about, like, we want more money in the space, hence the MII and GWS, GlassWall Syndicate and Material Innovation Initiative coming together. But beyond more money in the space, what other kind of hurdles are keeping large scale from taking place? For alt protein, it's not been enough co-manufacturing plants. What about for alt materials?
I have to say, we're still trying to figure this out, as everybody's trying to figure out the supply chain issues, and it's a very complex issue. There are parallels there, but also the supply chain in fashion world, in the material world, is very, very complicated. And I think the difference is that no one is buying a piece of leather and going home to sew a bag themselves. That's the difference between food and there are more middlemen. The consumers is even further separated from the whole production process. So the material needs to go into an existing supply chain, different kind of, whether it's artisans, factories, all these different people along the chain that has to work with the material with existing machineries. How do they change the existing machineries to be able to work with these new materials? What other invention has to happen along the way, along that whole supply chain? That is definitely a challenge. So other than money, just like any industry, money, talent.
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 Talent. Let's explore that a little bit. I would think the talent would be there and that it would be easily taken from another industry and brought into this industry. So anyone who had the vision or perhaps personal mission of wanting to see less environmentally damaging, less animal cruelty materials out there, they would just take this technology from their other industry and apply it here. Is it not that simple?
Unfortunately, I don't think it is that simple. We have seen companies that have, I mean, the companies that you see now, kind of in the news, partnering with the big brands and having actual, at least pilot kind of collections coming out to the market. They've been working on it for a few years, if not like a decade. But I think good news is that we're seeing things speeding up. And I think that has to do with, yes, money, more talents as well. I think it took some time to actually figure out what talents we're talking about. All these different technologies require different talents coming from different fields. A lot of them, who would have thought before alternative protein, a lot of people would never think that their skill set, the field that they were in was actually applicable in food. Like if you're making cultivated meat, the field that you come from, like maybe you have thought you would go into medicine or cosmetic or any other industries. You wouldn't have thought that you would go into food. So that came as a big shock to a lot of people kind of switching into that field. And I think that is going to happen in material science as well. Again, all these things that we talk about, like fermentation, again, also cellular agriculture. I'm very, very excited about cultivated leather myself. All these things, I think people who studied that field wouldn't necessarily think that this is where they can apply.
Mm-hmm.
I would also think that one of the challenges that I know happens, across industries is that, we're talking about science and technology here, right? Like we kind of like what Elaine said at the beginning, like we're not talking with the food side, like there was a veggie burger, but we're talking about like the application of science and technology in the material innovation side. So this isn't just replacing, animal leather with plastics. This is about the next generation. I know that Elaine has said before, like the current generation of next generation was kind of the plastic replacements. We're trying to get beyond that. So when you're looking for people who have the backgrounds and expertise that you need in science and technology, it's very hard, I think, for those people to then shift into a startup that usually pays a startup salary with some sort of equity vesting schedule. So you're taking, a personal cash flow hit and really having to believe that this is going to take off. And obviously we see that, but it's a career risk for those people who have, a much higher salary and have a hard time shifting into startups. I think that's something we see across industries.
Mm-hmm. I can really see that you're going to have a hard time paying the real talent that you want to pay. But the flip side is, food has a really tough time with technology in your food. Nobody wants to eat technology. And asking people to sacrifice on food is really a big one. It's not so bad. No one's eating your purse, as you said, Elaine. So no one has a problem with technology in their materials. And as long as it, so much of materials often is about vanity. So as long as it looks good, then people are really happy to say like, well, I didn't really have to give up anything and it's environmentally better. So check and check. If it's the same price, let's move on. So in a way, materials has it easier, I would say, in some ways, but they also have a little different, a little tougher in the talent department, and that so much food is some person who probably has no food background in their kitchen saying, I want to eat this and I can't find it. So I'm going to make it in my kitchen and then I'm going to really perfect it, and then I'm going to find a commercial kitchen, and then I'm going to find a co-manufacturer, and they grow from there. Most people aren't. I mean, some people are saying, I want a vegan bag and I'll just make it myself, but most people aren't starting with that passion in the kitchen. And so a lot of people end up working in food who aren't food scientists, but I don't know if that's really the case in materials. And so then you have to pay those people. So, yeah. Well, we're talking all about this innovation and, in generalities. Let's talk specific. Let's name some names. So I'll tell you one of the products that came out, and I was over the moon because it was so impactful for me. When I think of leather, it's an obvious one. I make the connection to animals. And so, of course, I don't want animal leather. But someone came out with a vegan tennis ball. And I had never thought about sheep's wool on a tennis ball. I never thought about that. And I was so over the moon, like, more power to you. I think the tennis ball was called sheep's. And it's, for me, I thought, oh, this is great because it's going to get the consumer thinking. Animal products are everywhere, and what else are they in? So that was my big product that I loved. What about you guys? What are you seeing in the marketplace that you're really excited about?
Can I just comment on the tennis ball thing? It's amazing, and I think that's a great example to show that people just really don't know what things are made of. And I think that is partly, as you said, it might be easier for materials because people don't have that really emotional attachment or even cultural baggage to the way that they have with food. But the flip side of this is that people actually do not know what goes into making something.
Yes.
I didn't know about the tennis ball. I should. So there is again that not just transparency. It's just the separation between the end consumer and how did this thing come about becoming this thing. There are just too many steps in between. And so even naming what we're now calling next gen materials is difficult because like people would be like, what does that mean? Right? When you say meat, they can be, okay, so yeah, of course, chicken, beef and, all those things, they would kind of have that concept that, okay, all these things are called meat. And when you talk about alternative protein, you probably mean those things. When we say next gen materials, it takes quite a lot of explaining. Oh, so we mean like it includes like leather, wool, and we'll be like, why not wool, fur and all that. And it takes a bit more explaining and getting used to for people to grasp the idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we're shifting, and more power to the consumer. And as we have this educated consumer who's starting to read food labels, they're starting to think, well, what else is in the stuff that I have? But previously, consumers, myself included, were shopped pretty unconsciously. I never really asked myself what's in my stuff. And now I ask myself all the time, what's in my stuff? Like Tom Vincel says, oh yeah, well, you're talking about tennis balls. By the way, footballs are made of leather. So just, it really is kind of everywhere. Macy, any companies that you really have your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, like that's why we're having this partnership, because we want to see more of these companies. Like in full transparency, we haven't had a lot of B2B material companies come through the syndicate. We've had Uncaged Innovations came through GlassWall Syndicate, which is Stephanie Downs' company, and she's working on bovine leather and exotic leathers, and we were really excited about that. And several of our members ended up investing in her company, so that was really exciting. But we want to see more of that, and so that's why we're here.
Yeah, it is so exciting. And I'll just say shout out to Stephanie Downs, the founder of Uncaged. She's working on exotic leathers. And gosh, what I like to see: snake, alligator, crocodile, leather, obviously fur, all of these things I just want to see out. It's very disturbing because at one level, not an argument I would ever make, but some people say, oh my gosh, well, I have to eat. And I say, well, okay, hold on. Let's talk about where protein comes from. It comes from plants. We'll have that conversation together. But there is no reason, even as a starter conversation, and ultimately the food, we turn people around and say, well, you don't really need animal meat. That's actually hurting you. But even that basic conversation, you don't ever have to have that with materials. You don't need a leather bag, a crocodile bag. That's insane. So, but we didn't know. We, the royal we, all the shoppers in the universe, we didn't know what was in it. We never thought to ask, but now we ask. It's very exciting, I think.
And there's so much cruelty involved with it, and something that I learned fairly recently, and we talk about this a lot with materials, right? Like, it's really damaging when people say it's a byproduct, because that's not true when we're talking about materials. But something that I had learned from Stephanie was about crocodiles, which I know you mentioned. Like, even as I'm a vegan for over 10 years now, I try to stay as well researched as I can. In my mind, I had no idea that these were like large scale operations, that there's, crocodiles in confinement, and they're, living in just such cruelty, and how many, crocodiles it takes for just one bag, because they're trying to like line up the designs. And there was just so much to it that I didn't even begin to understand. I think we've all found ourselves like falling down that hole where you're just kind of spiraling, and you're like, I cannot believe this. And it's not that I ever once thought that it wasn't a cruel, industry, but my gosh, like, the more my eyes opened up to it, the more disappointing it is when everyone goes, well, if I eat meat, then it's just a byproduct,
Yes, and more yes. And that's why I'm so inspired by the courage, I'll even say, of consumers in their very busy, very stressful lives to say, well, hold on, what is this coming from? And that line of questioning is starting to happen. I'm really happy to see it. Maybe we'll shift over as our time lessons together. Maybe we should talk about predictions. Elaine, I'll throw it to you. Where do you really see the industry going? And I'll say at the same time, maybe this is a question for Macy. She can take part 2 of this. We see lots of times in the press, the plant-based meat market is going to be 60% of the entire meat market by 2040, or it's going to have a CAGR of 56 percentage points, or et cetera. So you start to see these grand scale billion-dollar valuations for plant-based meat. I'll start with, what are your predictions, Elaine? And then Macy, you can pick it up with, what will the valuation be for this market? Let's give ourselves 3 years.
I'm so glad that I actually do have an answer to this. Okay. I haven't opened up, because we actually did a projection in our first State of the Industry report, because I think this is really important, right? To inspire people, to ignite the interest. Okay, so how big is this market by 2026? Our prediction is that it's going to grow into a 2.2 billion wholesale market size, because I'm sure you might have seen, like, I don't know, 2 dishes, like I think 70 something billion.
Yes, I did see that.
Right, like huge numbers.
Yeah.
We're looking at wholesale market size, exactly because Macy has mentioned this, right? We're interested in the material innovation, not the after few rounds of like design and getting to a big brand and what it is sold for. The retail market is a very, very different price structure. So we're looking at wholesale market size, really focusing on the material innovation, and we think it's going to reach 2.2 billion in 2026. And to compare that with alternative protein, in 2019, McKinsey did a projection that alt protein will reach 2.2 billion. 2.2 billion by 2019. So basically, that means
I see.
next-gen materials industry is about 5 years behind where the size of alternative protein. And that's a very kind of conservative projection. So that's hugely exciting to see.
So very interesting for investors, I would think, Macy, as they see the projection. I don't want to say it's a no-brainer, but they look what alt protein did. And then they're like, well, okay, let's go, because this is going to be a moneymaker. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about capital deployment, I know that in that MII report, and again, I keep referencing the MII report because they really came out with the first of its kind report. And as investors, we're really heavily reliant on data that is available. And there was very limited data. And I think that is also, of course, a challenge. So when you ask me questions, a lot of times I'm looking over at Elaine, because they're really the kind of point people right now for this information. But I know that in that report, they talked about next gen materials in 2020 raised around $500 million, which was the same as the 4 previous years combined. But what's so interesting about that is I was just looking at that alt protein, like the plant-based foods capital deployment. And it was talking about in 2020 that they raised 2.2 billion, like that was how much was invested in the plant-based space in 2020, which made up almost half of all the capital that was invested in the industry since 1980. So I just think it's interesting to think about all the capital that was deployed in plant-based, and we're already seeing such an increase in capital deployment in next-gen materials. Your brain just starts racing about like growth projections and what that could look like. And Elaine is much more qualified to comment on valuation and things like that of the market, but I sometimes am hesitant when people say, next gen materials is 5 years behind alt protein. Like, to me, that's assuming that they're going the same speed. And I feel like alt protein, walked so next gen could run. I mean, I really feel like a lot of those consumer elements and investor education elements. I mean, some of those walls just were torn down with alt protein recently. So I really think that next gen is just hot. We're so excited about it.
Hot. I love that. Let me, for those of us who are slow, the reason I'm slow here is because I'm looking online at the reports, and I want to pull that up for the viewers who are here on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I want to show everyone the MII website in just a second. But if we could go back to those numbers. So tell me again, and I'm sorry, this is a different question than the valuation of the market in the future. What is the investment in alt materials now? Do we have a number on that?
I think it was $500 million. Is that correct? I think it was 506 million.
Yeah. Okay. I'm on page 58 now, and that was on page 4. So I need to
Okay. Give or take, we'll go with a half. Okay. But alt protein, I'm so sorry, Macy, to do this either. I didn't hear you correctly, or maybe you and I can thumb wrestle for this. I think alt protein in 2021, the first 3 quarters, it's been $3.5 billion, which is more than all of 2020, which was 3.1. And that was all of 2010 to 2019, which was only 3. So the kind of, I got this from GlassWall Syndicate, but maybe we can thumb wrestle for it later. But I think the first 10 years, 2010 to 2019, 3 million. 2020 blew away the previous 10 years. And then now we've already blown away 2020 with 2021 in the first 3 quarters. So
absolutely. I think the statistic I was pulling was based off just plant-based.
Not
alt protein as a whole. But yes. Either way you look at it, I think that,
huge numbers. Yeah. And it's plant-based has had this huge growth, and then fermented proteins kind of came from behind, and they're getting all this investment. And I anticipate that's going to be the same with alt materials, because, we talk about the lack of talent, but in a way, maybe the talent isn't there because the salaries aren't there, but the technology's there. As I understand it, we can skin graft. What I mean is, if there's a burn victim, a human burn victim, and we can grow their skin in lab, and then you can graft on skin for a burn victim. I believe that technology is already there. So, maybe with the right budgets, we can pull that talent from big pharma or other places, to be determined. You'll all have to come back. But okay, what we're talking about, I want to go ahead and share my screen. Everybody give me a teeny bit of patience here. I want to pull up the materials innovation. Hopefully everybody can see this. Yeah, I just want to show everybody the reports that we're talking about. So the state of the industry reports, next gen materials. Again, this is why Material Innovation Initiative functions very much like Good Food Institute in its think tank and foundational support. Science and Technology White Space Report for 2021. What makes silk silk? We didn't even get to talk about this today, but this was big learning for me, why silk is the #1 environmentally damaging material. I did not know this until recently going to the MII site, which I encourage everyone to do, materialinnovation.org. Mycelium leather technology, really very interesting. And I just want to show a visual here. When you look at, these are the sorts of materials that they're working with. Now look at the lusciousness. I apologize for everybody on podcast. Look at the faux fur, the faux down, personally, one of my things I want to see gone forever. Leather, look at the crocodile skins, look at the silk, these kind of luscious, high quality materials. That's what we're talking about. So very much. I want to say it's a brave new world. Okay, so as we come back together here, and we do kind of wrap up, I want to thank everybody for being with me. So it just maybe if we could sum up for the listener and for me, predictions next 3 years. Macy, give me your 1 or 2 sentences. What are we seeing in the next 3 years?
Next 3 years, I think that within GlassWall Syndicate, we are expecting lots more investors. So as I mentioned, we started with just a few. We've got 200 now. We're expanding even more focus on next-gen materials and alternatives animal testing. So we're going to continue to get lots more investors, which means more capital deployment into all of these incredible companies. And I anticipate that we're going to see just a skyrocket of innovation and R&D. And I'm just so excited for what that final outcome is going to look like, because I got into this for animal welfare. I love the health aspect. I love the sustainability aspect. Of course, I care about all these things, but near and dear to my heart and my number one reason has and always will be animal welfare. And so I'm really excited about this partnership and really excited for what the next 2 to 3 years are going to look like, because I think they're going to be big. Yeah,
off the charts. Elaine, predictions next 3 years.
Okay, next 3 years. I want to go back to the 3 I's that so thank you so much, because I made that up and I love that I made that up. 3 I's. Yeah, I think we're going to see many more innovators. We've seen the number of startups grew like in the past year. It's just going to escalate even more. Investment money. I'm working on the next report now. I'm looking at the numbers, and it's very exciting. Industry brands really getting into it, and more things available in the market. A lot more in the market. I'm going to be buying a lot of stuff in the next 3 years.
Me too.
Me too. I will say my predictions for the next 3 years is you are going to see in alt materials, it will follow alt protein in that you have an educated consumer. They're now looking on the back of the label. They're actually reading those ingredients and they care about what's in there. And so ingredients are coming center pack. They're coming front of pack for consumers. So you'll have, plant-based ingredient or, barley or hemp or, these ingredients take kind of center stage. And I think the same will be true. It'll be branded as vegan or, plant-based or whatever. And I think that, but even more specifically than the term vegan or plant-based, it will be the materials and the innovation behind it. And I think that will be a big selling point for materials. I look at car companies like Tesla, Fisker, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, all, Tesla and Fisker, all vegan leathers. And then Mercedes-Benz and BMW, like 50% of their fleets. And and I think in Volkswagen too, I believe. And then I see all these fur houses. So these are kind of the big scale brands that move the needle, but I'm looking for more products like Sheeps, like the tennis ball and other things. So those are the things I'm looking for. Okay, a couple exit questions for you all as we wrap up. Macy had mentioned animal welfare, and I couldn't agree more. Both of you are turning your passion into a career. And I'm wondering what working in your passionate industry, in your industry with passion, I'm wondering what that has done for your quality of life. Macy?
I feel so blessed to work in the role that I work in, because I truly work with the most incredible people. Every single day I get to work with entrepreneurs, which are the innovators. Like they dream so big, they see it, they see that, and they're trying to enroll us in that vision. And then I work with investors that see something when it's not perfect, when it's not pretty, when it's still iterating. I think that's important that we talk about. Just like food, fashion's going to be similar. They're going to be iterating. The first version's never going to be as good as the 2.0, the 3.0, the 4.0. Give them time, it's going to get better. And these investors can kind of see that prototype and say, okay, I know that's not what's going to go to market, but I can see where you're going with this. And I can see that team and I can see that passion. And obviously the GlassWall team is incredible. And our members are just, they step up. I mean, we're talking about this committee. When we first, it was just the 3 of us. It was me and Elaine and Naomi. And we're like, hey, should we do a committee? This could be really great. What would that look like? And we're like, let's try to recruit a few members. And this is a volunteer position. So we sent out a email and just said, hey, we're starting this committee if anyone might be interested in joining. I think it was within 48 hours, we had a dozen investors. They're sending their resumes and their cover letters to be like considered for this volunteer position. And we're like, that's how serious they were taking it though. And that's how serious we're taking it. So to go back to answer your question, I just work with the most smart, savvy, passionate, incredible people. And I get to play a small part in the success of their company and the success of their portfolio, and kind of play that middle person between it, and work with incredible partners like GFI and like MII. And, we have so many incredible partners. So just blessed, I guess, would be the word I would use.
Yeah, I love that. Entrepreneurs and the investors who support them are the most hopeful people on the planet. Elaine, what does it do for your quality of life to work in an industry that you're passionate about?
Completely changed my life, and I'm gonna be shameless and promote the book that I wrote about this.
Do it. I can't believe we've waited this long to get to your book. Tell me about your
plug
book.
Plug it.
Do it.
Yes, it's called Your Next 40,000 Hours. And if you're all familiar with the organization 80,000 hours, like we're supposed to work about 80,000 hours in our lifetime. So Your Next 40,000 Hours, this book that I wrote, is about how to reinvent, create a second career that is just purpose-driven. So it was my personal journey, and all these heroes that I've met in this journey, GFI, MII, all these feeling very blessed that every single day I'm working with these amazing, extraordinary human beings that make me feel hopeful. Like, we see a lot of bad things and problems that we're trying to solve, and we are dedicating our career to basically solve these problems, right? And it really helps to be surrounded by these amazing people to keep you hopeful. And it changed me completely. I switched from being a finance lawyer to where I am now. It was like kind of a decade of finding myself, reinventing myself, growing personally and spiritually. It is just life-changing. Yeah, and just like Macy, I started off doing it for the animals as well. And it's just, there's no regret. Every single day, there is this peace inside of you when you know that you're doing something meaningful.
Well, the two of you just beam, so you can see that it's life-changing and life-affirming. Okay, more wrap-up questions. Macy, what do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Oh gosh, this is such a tough question. What do I wish I knew 10 years ago? I wish I would, if I could, I think that this applies to everyone, but probably especially to entrepreneurs, but like, trust your gut, because she never lets you down. And I trust her, and she truly has never let me down. But you have so many instances where she's led you in the right direction. And I don't know about you all, but I still question her like daily, and she always leads me in the right direction. So if I could go back and tell myself anything, your gut, listen to it.
Yeah, be open to actually hearing.
Yeah, even when it's tough to hear. Sometimes it's tough to hear.
Elaine, how about you?
I think it takes time we are all at a different stage of our life journey. And sometimes doing this work, it's easy to become angry or even judgmental and kind of lose that basic compassion is what brought us into this field. And sometimes, we kind of lose track of that. Sorry, what was the question? So
what do you wish you knew 5-10 years ago that you know now?
I think it's 10 years ago or now, it's just love myself a little bit more, like hug myself like how I would treat my dog, kind of, because we're all in a different stage of the journeys. There are reasons why things are happening now. There are things why, you need to learn now the hard way, because that's a building block to where you will be in, 10 years from now. So, yeah.
I love what you said about like leading with kindness and compassion, though, because I do think, obviously when you are so passionate about the space, you have to understand what the problem is before you can really look at the solution. And we get so deep into the things that really hurt our heart and our spirit. And then also, entrepreneurship, venture capital, sometimes it can be really, really intense. And I do think that something I'm really studying, like servant leadership, I tried to remember why I got in this, which was to lead with compassion and empathy. And I do think sometimes, unfortunately, when you make it a priority to keep that, sometimes people don't think that you're, as business savvy or as professional or as this or as that. And it's like, you can never, you can go into something really positive, really encouraging, and not lose that compassion and empathy that you're leading with, and also still know how to close a deal really well and how to support an entrepreneur really well and do a financial model really well and all of those things. I just think that that's really important.
And I do have to say, for the record, nobody knows how to close a deal like Macy Marriott at the GlassWall Syndicate. So you are living proof of all this. And I love what you both say about we have to keep our eye on the solution. Ultimately, this is what business does well. And so when you have compassionate business, you're really out there to succeed. We see these grand scale problems and we find solutions and we scale them up for global change, for the betterment of people, the planet, and animals. I mean, what could be more hopeful and what could be more inspiring than that? Okay, I keep saying that we're ending this interview, but at some point we actually will very, very quickly. And now I mean like one sentence out of each of you.
I'm ready.
You're having a bad day, which I can't believe either of you two beaming beauties could ever have a bad day. But let's say you're having a bad day. Elaine, what is the phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the game?
It's okay, which is what I say to my dog constantly.
You and your dog have a lot in common. I see.
I dedicated my book to my dog, so.
I love this. Okay, it's okay. Macy, what do you say?
So there was this movie growing up that I used to watch as a kid. I'll say this very quickly, but she looked at herself in the mirror and she said, so say your name, I'm Macy Marriott, and there's nobody in the world better than me. And it's not to say that you're better than everybody else. It's to say nobody is better than you. So when I'm having a really, really rough day, I try to look at myself and I say, I'm Macy Marriott. There's nobody in the world better than me.
I love this.
I deserve to be there, just like anybody else.
I love this. I love this. I love this. I love this. Well, I'm going to have to quote Macy Marriott now in a lot of upcoming meetings. Okay, equally, just like your bad day, you're running around, you're crazy, you don't have time for lunch. Elaine, what's your go-to snack?
Dark chocolate.
Dark chocolate. Yeah, I'm all about it with sea salt. Macy, go-to snack.
Oh gosh. I really like to do Triscuits with a little bit of vegan cheese, a little bit of salsa, and a little bit of vegan sour cream.
Well,
I don't know if it's a Midwest thing or a Marriott thing, but that is definitely like a go-to snack.
That is a partay. I love how you two roll. I want to thank Elaine Siu and Macy Marriott for all that you do. The Next Gen Materials Group, I'm not calling it the right thing, Committee. Sorry. Committee at GlassWall Syndicate and with Material Innovation Initiative. The two of working together. So we're getting more investors into the space, trying to drive that technology, trying to drive new products, really support those innovators, entrepreneurs out there who are looking to change the world at a grand scale. We're all grateful for that kind of activity. If you want to be involved with either MII or GlassWall Syndicate, just go to glasswallsyndicate.org and
materialinnovation.org.
And materialinnovation.org. I'm going to get that right. It'll be in the notes for this podcast, glasswallsyndicate.org and materialinnovation.org. So you can find them there. Of course, you can find all three of us on LinkedIn. I want to thank Elaine and Macy. And then to everybody watching today, I will see you all next week. And thank you all for all you do. And thanks for being vegan. Even sometimes it helps. Bye, everybody. See you next week. Elaine and Macy, don't go anywhere. Everybody else, have a great